This is California's Imperial Valley of today. Vast expanses of fertile fields, 500,000 acres of some of America's most productive farmland. But it wasn't always this way. This place used to be a desert. At about the time that our colonies on the Atlantic coast were rebelling against English rule, a Spanish captain, Juan Bautista de Anza, led a group of explorers from Yuma across the sand dunes, down the valley, to the San Gabriel Mission. A century later, this southern route to the California gold rush was still so forbidding that the name it was dubbed by the early explorers still applied: La Jornada de los Muertos, the Journey of the Dead. Located in Southern California, the Imperial Valley is part of a great natural basin in what is known as the Colorado Desert. Although the area receives an average of less than 3 inches of rainfall a year, the surging waters of the mighty Colorado River are just 60 miles away. By the 1850s, a few people began to see in this desert what for some would become an obsession.
The first fellow who recognized the potential here was a man named William Blake. He was a surveyor, was hired by Congress to define the logical location for a route for a railroad to the West Coast. During his survey, he noticed ancient shorelines at the foot of the mountains and realized that the whole area used to be an inland sea. So he took some barometric readings, and he discovered that the desert floor was below sea level.
Another pioneer who dreamed of conquering the desert was Oliver Wozencraft, a doctor who crossed the area on the way to the California gold rush in 1849. In 1861, Wozencraft hired an engineer to make a survey and recommend a route for a canal.
Wozencraft was not only a guy who had an idea that a canal could come in here, but he also had the connections to do something about it. He was well connected in state politics and also in Washington, D.C. He actually got a bill drafted and they got it out of committee. He would have succeeded, too, if it hadn't been for the outbreak of the Civil War. Consequently, the whole idea just languished for years.
Wozencraft died in 1887 at the age of 73. Like so many who went before him, the mirage of a desert spring remained just beyond his grasp. By the turn of the century, America was once again on the march. Great enterprises were the order of the day, and a great number of young men of ambition came west to make their marks. There was money to be made in bringing water to desert lands acquired for pennies an acre. In 1892, at age 20, a young black-haired youth left Michigan University and came west to study engineering. It wasn't long before Charles Robinson Rockwood hooked up with a survey crew studying the feasibility of irrigating a high plateau in Mexico. The Mexican land was too high, but Rockwood found a rancher who told him about a great valley west of the Colorado and below sea level. By 1896, Rockwood had formed the California Development Company to divert water from the Colorado River into an ancient riverbed below the Mexican border. Although Rockwood campaigned for years to attract capital from financiers all over the world, the company was nearly broke until George Chaffee, an irrigation expert and financier with an international reputation, came on board. Chaffee had been recruited by Wozencraft in 1882. But it wasn't until Chaffee's success with a project in Australia convinced him that farmers could survive the desert heat that he decided to join Rockwood. With Chaffee's help and prestige, the waters of the Colorado were carried from a diversion point at Pilot Knob down to an ancient river channel, another 40 miles through Mexico, then north into the Imperial Valley. By May of 1901, with an investment of less than 10 miles of canal, water was flowing into the Imperial Valley. Work on the rest of the system went on at a feverish pace. Ditch gangs carried the main canal into the heart of the valley. Laterals were surveyed and rushed to completion. As water flowed into the desert, people flocked to buy up prime farmland.
After a 7 days drive from near Riverside with a caravan of 4 four-horse wagons and 2 single buggies, we came into Imperial Valley just at sunrise. The morning was bright and clear. Having always lived where we were closely shut in by either forest or mountains, It was to me surely an impressive sight to look across the miles and miles of desert, with only here and there a tiny brown shrub striving half-heartedly for an existence on the barren wastes of sand. The mountains in Arizona more than 100 miles away, with Pilot Knob standing out in the foreground. Mabel Tuttle Edgar.
Almost from the start, the California Development Company was plagued with problems. Their initial success, ironically, proved to be a major problem. Development of the area boomed, and that led almost immediately to water shortages in the winters of 1902 and 1903.
You have to remember that the Colorado River was really a wild river then, and the rates of flow fluctuated really dramatically. In addition to that, the company had problems and disputes with the federal government over water rights. But it was Mother Nature that really gave them fits.
The problem was the Colorado River. Not only did it carry millions of acre-feet of water, it also carried millions of tons of silt. The same forces that carved the Grand Canyon upstream deposited silt and choked the canals and diversion channels of the California Development Company.
In the winter of 1904, the Colorado River was really low, and the silt built up. So to get around the silt, and of course the federal government, the company decided to build a channel some 60 feet wide and 3,300 feet into Mexico. That was a big mistake. They didn't bother to build a control gate, figuring they would close the gap before the spring floods. The trouble was, the spring floods came in the winter.
In 1905, the Colorado's usual pattern of high water in spring was broken when an unusual series of winter storms flooded Arizona's Gila River. The Colorado tore through the new diversion channel, changing the river's course, sending its entire flow down the Alamo and New River channels through the Imperial Valley and into an area known as the Salton Sink.
They should have listened to Rockwood. He once said that if you throw a pebble into the Colorado River, you could change the whole face of geography.
Because there were no telegraph lines in the area, the warning was carried by relay riders on horseback.
The farmers could hear the water coming, and when it came about 3 or 4 hours after the rider had warned us, it carried such items as large timbers 20 feet long, cross ties, and railroad irons.
One of the really frightening things about the flood was the backward moving waterfall. The land in Imperial Valley is so lightly compacted that an obstruction in the river caused a waterfall to form, a small waterfall that gradually grew bigger and bigger and taller until it was 20 feet high, moving backward from the Salton Sea all the way to Calexico, tearing out everything in its path.
We stood on the banks at Calexico and watched tons of earth giving away, falling into the river with a boom that could be heard for miles. While we stood watching, 3 houses were undermined and tumbled into the swirling waters and were rushed away as wreckage to the Salton Sea.
The progress of the waterfall was finally halted after Mobley Meadows, who owned a livery stable in Calexico, waded into the river with sticks of dynamite and leveled the channel. The Colorado proved to be just too big for the California Development Company to handle alone. In an attempt to save their railroad lines, the Southern Pacific stepped in. In October of 1906, the cut was closed, only to reopen a week later after another flash flood. The cut was closed again in November, only to wash away again in December.
The Southern Pacific was ready to give up the fight, but Theodore Roosevelt himself interceded and guaranteed the costs, which incidentally he never paid. And so Southern Pacific turned once again to the task, and the cut then was 400 feet wide. 1,500 men were called into the final fight to save the future of the Imperial Valley. It was like a military campaign against Mother Nature herself. Every flat car Southern Pacific owned was hauling rock. It was the fastest railroad freight movement ever accomplished anywhere. On the 11th day of February 1907, the fight finally ended.
Over $12 million had been spent to save the Imperial Valley. The floods had taken thousands of acres of some of the valley's best farmland and created the Salton Sea, a freshwater lake some 35 miles long. The floods also swept away the very entity that had caused the tragedy, burying the California Development Company in a sea of debt.
Eventually, the settlers had it. And the settlers wanted to get control of the water and get control of the river once and for all. Themselves, not through a company, but through a kind of a cooperative arrangement. And that's what the Imperial Irrigation District was. The Imperial Irrigation District needed Charles Rockwood's expertise as an engineer, and so they put him on as the first engineer for the Imperial Irrigation District. But he was not the president. He had lost his dream.
With its ability to produce crops year-round, the Imperial Valley saw a steady increase in the number of farms. But life was a constant challenge for the families who settled the desert.
We had to haul our drinking water from the Eucalyptus Canal over a mile into the center of the ranch where our house or tent was located. And so we kept barrels, 50-gallon drums, up on the canal bank, and we'd fill up those drums and then come back the next day and empty those drums. What water was in them, and usually you could pour the top half off, and the bottom half would be mostly silt. And you'd have to turn the barrel upside down and pound on the bottom to let the silt drop out. But you'd skim the top part, the clear part off, and then you'd put a filter called a sandstone filter inside your water barrel and start a suction hose to a lower point, and this water would be filtered that way, and you'd get even the small dirt out of the water, and you'd have a product that was pretty clear and drinkable. Tasted like terrible, but it was clear, and consequently we thought it was probably pretty safe. In a business sense, the real problem was the sandharrow would turn the water out of the canal into your ditch. It would flow down the ditch for about a day and a half, and then the ditch would be full of silt and start to overflow. And you got to shut the water off and shovel a ditch. A guy who was a champion shoveler could clean a quarter of a mile of ditch in a day. And that was a long day. The district solved their problem by putting the Ruth dredges in the canals, and they constantly bucketed the silt out of the bottom of the canal. Otherwise, the canals would have filled up.
Summers in the era before air conditioning could make life in the desert nearly unbearable.
But I can remember many days when it was 125, and it was tough. All you could do was drink water, try to stand in the shade, hope that a little breeze would come along, and you wear a wet shirt, that helps if there's a little breeze. My mother would put us to bed at night and dip a sheet in water and put the wet sheet over us, and if we went to sleep real quick, everything was all right. If we didn't go to sleep before the sheet dried out, she'd have to do it over again, because that was the only way you could get cool.
As important as water was to the early settlers, there were still shortages. Low water on the Colorado was a nagging concern for farmers on both sides of the border.
In those days, whenever the river was short of water, and the flow down the Alamo would be curtailed because they couldn't get the water, the Mexicans would take all the water. And you know, you couldn't blame them. The canal ran through their land, they were going to take it first. And we got what was left, if any.
To guarantee a consistent supply of water for the desert, a number of problems would have to be solved. A new All-American Canal would have to be built on American soil. A problem of water rights would have to be settled between a number of states and the federal government. And there was the nagging problem of silt. But still, the biggest problem of all was the Colorado River itself.
The All-American Canal, as legislation, was defeated in Congress. Then it was resubmitted, and each time it was resubmitted, another congressman added on something else for his district. So that pretty soon you had a series of bills called the Boulder Canyon Act that really was the water reclamation project for the entire Southwest.
Spearheading the effort were two men with very different styles. Mark Rose was an area pioneer and a landowner.
Mark Rose. big and fat, smoked cigars, blustery, bullying in his demeanor. And he went to Washington, and he was our lobbyist, and he cajoled the congressman finally into voting for the Boulder Canyon Act.
Phil Swing was a lawyer and a politician.
His influence on water in Southern California is monumental. He was a good-looking guy, and he was loved by the people of Imperial Valley, and especially my mother, who had a crush on him because she was 15 years old at that time and thought he was really he was her hero.
In 1928, Congress authorized the Boulder Canyon Project, which included what became Hoover Dam to control the flow of water, the Imperial Dam to divert water and remove silt, and the All-American Canal to carry the water across the desert. Back in the Imperial Valley, Phil Swing was welcomed home a hero. The effort to tame the Colorado was massive, even by today's standards. Hoover Dam is still the highest concrete structure in the Western Hemisphere. The All-American Canal was dug with power shovels, hundreds of horse-drawn Fresno scrapers, and a 650-ton drag line used to move millions of tons of sand dunes. In October of 1940, the first scheduled deliveries of water rolled down the canal. In the 1930s, power was supplied to the Imperial Valley by a private company over lines they boasted were the longest transmission lines in the world, running all the way from Northern California, a distance of more than 400 miles. Trouble was, they probably also had double the line losses of any company in the world, leading to rates twice those in neighboring San Bernardino County. With the 5 drops on the All-American Canal, hydroelectric power generation was a natural for the district.
They built a diesel-electric plant in Brawley in order to start handling a few customers, and the two companies would be in very sharp discord over service, and you'd have 2 sets of electric pole lines running down the alley of practically every street in town. It got to the point where there was a power failure. The salesman for one company would visit the other company's customers and get them hooked up because otherwise he'd be without electricity for a while. So that was an ideal opportunity to get in there and get a quick one. In 1943, the Southern Sierra Power Company had had enough, and they sold out to the Imperial Irrigation District.
At first, it was thought that hydroelectric plants along the All-American Canal would be adequate to serve the Imperial Valley's needs. But with the area's rapid growth, a buildup in generating facilities was begun that continues today. In 1949, the El Centro steam plant went online. With the addition of new units in 1952, 57, and 68, the El Centro plant is now the largest district-owned source of power generation. During the 70s, 4 gas turbine units were added in Coachella to increase capacity and for quick additional power during peak service loads. 1979 saw the addition of more gas turbine generating capacity at the district's Rockwood plant outside Brawley. Today, the Imperial Irrigation District provides power to Imperial County, as well as to parts of Riverside and San Diego counties. In addition to the desilting and diversion operation at the Imperial Dam, the district operates 1,442 miles of lateral canals, 148 miles of main canals, and the 82-mile-long All-American Canal. There's also a network of 1,457 miles of drainage ditches to handle surface and subsurface runoff. Hoover Dam's Lake Mead operates as a huge water storage facility. Water is released based on the needs of the downstream users. At Imperial Dam, the water is diverted into one of 3 desilting basins, measuring 540 feet wide by 770 feet long. As the water slows down, the silt settles where it is channeled into drains. Each basin is equipped with 24 scrapers designed to remove 70,000 tons of silt per day. From there, water travels down the All-American Canal, past 5 drops equipped with hydroelectric generators to 3 main canals, then to a series of lateral canals. Sanjeros, or ditch riders, open and close gates on individual fields, filling the day's water delivery orders.
Here in the valley, our irrigation water has a high degree of soluble salts. In order to deal with that, we install deep tile drainage in trenches as deep as 6 feet deep. These lines are as long as 1,000 feet long and have perforation, and are brought to a baseline that collects the water and takes them to open drains that then carry the water onto the Salton Sea. Our salts are soluble. The bad thing is that they come in the water because they're soluble. The good thing is we have enough water to flush them through and keep them in solution, then they just go right on out with the drain water.
Except for a few places where small pumps raise the subsurface drainage into the ditches, the entire system is powered by gravity. Because it takes several days for water ordered from Hoover Dam to reach a given field, an ongoing balancing act is played out each day at the district's control center. Farm ordering patterns are matched with current weather data, seasonal fluctuation patterns, and statistics on current crop acreages. But the final amount ordered is the judgment of one man, the district's water master. Every day at 12:20, it's his job to predict the valley's water needs and to place the district's order. With a consistent supply of water, the Imperial Valley is a nearly ideal place to grow crops. The area was filled with silt from the Colorado River, deposited over thousands of years. The valley's sediments are virtually a Grand Canyon in reverse order, with soil laid down layer upon layer, thousands of feet thick. The year-round sunshine and mild winters allow several crops to be grown on the same land during the year. By any measure, the Imperial Valley's share of the nation's agribusiness is huge. The current value of crops produced here is over $1 billion annually. Over 40 different crops each gross over $1 million a year. Livestock leads the list with cattle and alfalfa production of over $450 million. Dozens of varieties of fruits and vegetables are grown in abundance, as well as sugar beets, wheat, dates, cotton, and wool. In fact, Imperial County always ranks among the nation's top 10 agricultural producers. As it enters the 21st century, managing for growth has become a primary goal of the Imperial Irrigation District. Because of the availability of inexpensive land and power, population growth is expected to double by the year 2020, triple by the year 2040. Since the flow from the Colorado is finite, one of the keys to future growth is wise water management. The district has become one of the world's leaders in operating efficiency. In 1989, an historic agreement was reached between the Imperial Irrigation District and Southern California's Metropolitan Water District. Hailed as a model for cooperation between agricultural and urban water users, the pact literally created a new source of water for Greater Los Angeles through conservation in the Imperial Valley. The agreement called for a 5-year construction and implementation program financed by the Metropolitan Water District. In exchange, the water conserved by Imperial Valley's largely agricultural users is available to Southern California's urban and industrial users. As part of the largest conservation program ever undertaken in a single district, an ongoing program is underway to line canals to prevent seepage. Already, more than 1,000 miles of canals have been lined or converted to pipe. Other conservation measures include the computerized regulation of reservoirs, installation of non-leak gates, 12-hour deliveries, cutting the amount of water stored in the system, lateral interceptors to better distribute the water in the system, and programs for on-farm irrigation water management. An example of the district's innovative approach to problem solving is the effort to control hydrilla. That's a weed. It's a real problem in canals because of its ability to grow at the rate of almost 10 inches a day. After exploring mechanical and chemical methods of eradication, the solution was found in the stocking of triploid grass carp, a sterile variety of voracious weed eaters.
The district built this facility in 1987 so we could produce about 20,000 fish every single year and put them out into the irrigation canals. Each fish, when it goes in the water, is about 1/4 to 1/2 pound and can eat its weight every single day during the summer. Right after we fertilize the eggs, the sperm and eggs are put together. We put them into a pressure chamber, add several thousand pounds per square inch, and that forces an extra set of chromosomes into that fertilized egg, and we have a sterile fish because of it. We use sterile fish so we don't have to worry about these fish reproducing in the waterways of Imperial Valley. And we determine that they're sterile by bringing them in one at a time, extracting a little bit of blood from the chin of each fish. We put it into a machine called a culture counter, and the culture counter tells us the size of the nucleus in that red blood cell of each one of those fishes. Turns out that the sterile fish simply have a larger nucleus than the fertile fish, and the machine tells us yes for a fish or no for a fish. We separate them, and the fish that it says yes go into the irrigation canals. This program has reduced overall maintenance costs and has replaced any chemical programs that we might have had with a nice, ecologically safe program using a nice weed-eating fish.
Faced with the need to repower its El Centro generating station's Unit 2 power plant, the district built the first fossil fuel generating plant in California since new efficiency standards were adopted in 1979. The new plant is now the most efficient of its kind in California. To meet the area's growing power demands and to make sure that electricity is obtained at the lowest rate, the district has pursued negotiations with a number of utilities and plants throughout the western United States. To maintain maximum flexibility, the district has participated in a number of transmission line projects and has acquired new generation facilities, like the Yucca plant in Yuma, Arizona. The district has also joined with the Southern California Public Power Authority to purchase an interest in the Palo Verde nuclear generation station in Arizona. To promote energy conservation, the district utilizes a number of programs, including home and commercial energy audits, advertising, and rebate programs for heat pumps and evaporative coolers. Here at the Systems Operations Center, power generated by the district, as well as power acquired from outside sources, is managed. The system processes data for load forecasting and purchasing of power based on the most economic model. Automatic generation control regulates the power generated locally, allowing the flexibility to meet power demand on a minute-by-minute basis. Also housed at the center is the district's own long-distance telecommunications network. By linking division offices and facilities at Imperial Dam and at the drops along the All-American Canal, the district is able to provide secure communications while saving thousands of dollars per month in long-distance charges. With its huge structures, its modern efficiencies, and its spirit of innovation, the Imperial Irrigation District is a massive system, constantly changing to meet the challenges and the opportunities of the future. The mission is simple: to deliver water and power to the customers effectively, efficiently, at the lowest possible cost. But what's so compelling about this place is that so much abundance could rise from a part of the earth that was once thought fit only for the dead. The Imperial Irrigation District is a fitting monument to the vision, the courage, and the stubborn persistence of those who brought water to the Imperial Valley and to those who live and farm on the desert floor today.